Good morning, fellow Toastmasters. What about Bob? I know that dude. I'm going to share a little information about him today. 7 years ago. No, that's not about Bob. That's about Abe. I regret that I have but one. No, that was about Nathan Hale. That wasn't about Bob. Ask not what your country can. No, that's from JFK. That's not what about Bob. As I look back over my life, I didn't accomplish anywhere near what those people did. And I've had a lot longer time to not accomplish it. I outlived them all. As many of you know, I've been a Toastmaster a while, but I grew up on a small farm in mid-Michigan. And that was a great life. And I want to share a little bit about that, and I'll start at the beginning. 70 and a few years ago, Bob Smith was brought forth onto this continent. Conceived in, well, I'm going to talk about my parents' 53 Chevy. Conceived in liberty and dedicated to the proposition, first children are always the best. I want to give you a little history about our farm. My grandparents bought it in 1908. When they bought the property, there weren't any buildings on that farm at all. They found a couple of abandoned houses and moved them to that location and just stuck them together. It was not as easy a task as it might sound. The technology in 1908, and as it turned out in 1909, was not significantly different from what the Romans had. They basically cut down some trees, carved them up into logs, with the assistance of horses, pulled them up onto those logs, and started towards the final destination, corner of Ferris and Buchanan. It was a slow and laborious task, because about every 10 feet, you had to whoa the horses. Take those logs that now were behind the house, walk around, put them in front of the house, giddy up, go another 10 feet, stop again, move the logs. This took longer than I think they anticipated, because they spent the winter of 1908, 1909 in somebody's field. They didn't make it all the way to their final destination that first year. It was a bit of, you might say, the Smiths salute to the Donner Party. Although we had a better survival rate. As they were going from one location to another, they picked up rocks along the way. When they finally got to the final destination, they stuck the houses together, scattered rocks out, kind of lifted the houses, kind of scattered the rocks around underneath the house, put the house down, Smith Homestead was ready. Now, one of the disadvantages of having a house with no basement, no foundation, not even a slab, but elevated a few inches off the ground with rocks, every small critter you can imagine can get under that house. Cats, possums, raccoons, that's okay. Skunks, not so good. And one of the things you may or may not know about animals, when they die, they like to die alone. They tend to wander off from the rest of them. Well, a house elevated about that high makes a perfect place to wander off and die. I was the skinniest little kid you ever saw. Guess whose job it was to crawl under the house and drag out those dead animals. And the bright side is, a dead skunk doesn't smell any worse than a dead cat. We didn't have as many financial, we had a good life on the farm, maybe not financially, a lot of spending cash. And we didn't have maybe some of the modern conveniences that people have nowadays. One of those modern conveniences we didn't have was indoor plumbing. A lot of our friends, neighbors, relatives did. And I really liked going to their house. Because when the call of nature beckoned, You didn't actually have to go out in nature. Have any of you ever experienced outhouse porcelain in January? It's an eye-opening experience. If you haven't, you may want to add that to your bucket list. Or maybe not. Let me talk a little bit about the extended family. My mom had one sister, and we didn't do a lot with their family. They didn't have all the social graces, the financial enhancements, all the things that we did have. Matter of fact, we kind of thought of them as hillbillies. My dad's side had 6 brothers and sisters, none of which moved more than a couple, 3 miles from the original homestead. That generated a couple of issues. One, our family tree was really tall, but there weren't very many branches. And I can assure you, no cousins ever married each other. I'll qualify that. No first cousins ever married each other. My grandmother had a lifetime lease on the farm. My dad took it over when he was 13. She had a lifetime lease, which meant all of her kids, grandkids, great-grandkids, and assorted strangers came to our house a lot. It was a beehive of activity. Really fun for a kid. Not so good for probably the shyest person I've ever known, my dad. People come, he'd hang out, he'd have some project out in the barn to take care of while everybody chit-chatted and talked. What I did notice is after we got indoor plumbing, a lot of those people that came to visit, they extended their visit from before that. I think a lot of their visits were limited by the size of their bladders. I eventually graduated high school, went to Western Michigan University. Go Broncos! I took a job at Consumers, probably the best decision I ever made. I was here 40 years, 17 days, and I think during that time I had 3 sick days. I think growing up on a farm, you get a certain work ethic. And seeing it was a dairy farm, you had to milk cows every day. You think people have rigid schedules. The periodicity of a cow is unbelievable. They want to be milked every day, and a lot of times 2 times a day. Sundays, Saturdays, holidays, doesn't matter. You milk cows. I don't think I really realized how poor we were when I was growing up. But now, I think that helps me appreciate what I've got now. And what a great company I've worked for. I hope you all appreciate what you've got right here. You've got it really good, a lot better than most. And if at some point somebody asks you, what about Bob? You can say, I know that dude. Thank you.